Hey everyone, welcome to Lecture 9 on the pragmatic justification of induction. The objectives for this video are the following. So after watching, everyone should be able to, number 1, explain the pragmatic justification of scientific induction, and number 2, argue that the pragmatic justification of scientific induction cannot rationally justify scientific induction. Now, let's have a little recap before we get started. So last time we looked at the inductive justification of induction, and the idea was this. We've seen Hume's argument, which said that to rationally justify a system of scientific inductive logic, we have to establish that the E-arguments it judges to be inductively strong give us true conclusions most of the time. And according to Hume, if we try and establish that by a deductively valid argument, it falls short of the desired goal, whereas if we try and establish that by an inductively strong argument, we end up begging the question. Now we saw in the last lecture, lecture 8, that the proponent of the inductive justification of induction tried to argue that rationally justifying a system of scientific inductive logic using an inductively strong argument was not question begging after all. And we also saw that this wasn't entirely successful. In this lecture, we're going to look at the pragmatic justification of induction, which tries to argue that we can, after all, rationally justify a system of scientific inductive logic using a deductively valid argument. So whereas the proponent of the inductive justification of induction attacks one horn of this dilemma that Hume's problem poses, the proponent of the pragmatic justification attacks this other horn of the dilemma. So let's see how the pragmatic justification works. Now, the pragmatist position I'll refer to throughout this lecture is roughly that of this guy, Hans Reichenbach, who elaborated the pragmatic justification of induction that was originally proposed by another guy called Herbert Feigl. Now, to see how the pragmatist justification goes, remember that according to Hume, this is what we need to do to rationally justify a system of scientific induction. He says, a system of inductive logic is rationally justified if and only if it is shown that the arguments to which it assigns high inductive probability yield true conclusions from true premises most of the time, and the E-arguments to which it assigns higher inductive probability yield true conclusions from true premises more often than the arguments to which it assigns lower inductive probability. Now, Reichenbach agreed with Hume that no deductively valid argument with premises that are known to be true can give us the conclusion that scientific induction will give us true conclusions most of the time. So what Reichenbach proposes is that we don't actually need to meet the conditions of this suggestion, Hume's suggestion on the screen, to rationally justify scientific induction. He thought that this suggestion was too strong a requirement, so too much. Now here it gets a little bit subtle, so this is what Reichenbach suggested that we actually need to do to justify scientific induction. He said, a system of inductive logic is rationally justified if we can show that the arguments that it judges inductively strong will give us true conclusions most of the time, if E-arguments judged inductively strong by any method will. Now, he then argues that in fact we can establish that scientific inductive logic meets the conditions of this suggestion using a deductively valid argument. And the point here is that just like Hume argued, it's impossible to show that any inductive method will be successful, but it is possible to show that if any inductive method is successful, then scientific induction will also be successful. And this, for Reichenbach, is enough to justify scientific induction. Because, right, we do in real life make predictions about the future. So we must be using some system of induction. Otherwise, we're faced with being in this empty kind of skeptical position where we make predictions, but we also want to say that our system of making those predictions is no good. And that's weird. None of us want to say that we make predictions even though we know that they're no good. This is why it's called the pragmatic justification of induction. In practice, we do make predictions, And then the point is that even if our system of induction by which we make those predictions is scientific induction, or whether it's something else, if our system that we use in practice works, then scientific induction works too. Now, here is how Reichenbach's argument goes in more detail. We've got premise 1, which says either nature is uniform or it's not. Premise 2, which says if nature is uniform, scientific induction will be successful. And premise 3, which says if nature is not uniform, then no method will be successful. And the conclusion says, therefore, if some method of induction will be successful, then scientific induction will be successful. Now, we're going to pause here and have a quick question about this argument. Now, this is a deductively valid argument, so we want all the premises to be true, because that will guarantee the truth of the conclusion. Now, premise 1 is obviously true. Premise 2 is what we've just argued is true. Now, the book talks about premise 3 a little. It talks about one objection you might raise to premise 3, and then Reichenbach's reply to that objection. I won't go into that little discussion here, but it will be on one of the assignment problems, so do go and have a read of that section of the book. Now let's assume for now that premise 3 is also true. Then what we've got is a deductively valid argument with all of its premises true, so it must have a true conclusion. Now the problem is, unfortunately, when we unpack the conclusion, we see that in fact it isn't quite enough to overcome Hume's problem entirely. So let's see why that's the case. To unpack the conclusion, we're going to go back to those levels of induction that came up last time in lecture 8. Now remember that according to the levels, arguments on level 1 talk about individual things or events, and for n greater than or equal to 1, arguments on level n plus 1 talk about arguments on level n. Also, for all n, level n plus 1 of a system of inductive logic consists of some rules for assigning probabilities to level n plus 1 arguments. So when we talk about a system of induction, really what we're talking about is a system of induction composed of many distinct levels of rules. So to justify a whole system of inductive logic, whatever that system is, you have to justify each of its levels. So you have to justify the level 1 rules of assigning probabilities, the level 2 rules of assigning probabilities, and so on. So when Reichenbach makes this conclusion, if some method of induction will be successful, then scientific induction will be successful. What we really need this to mean is if level 1 rules of some method of induction are successful, then level 1 rules of scientific induction are also successful. And if level 2 rules of some method of induction are successful, then level 2 rules of scientific induction are also successful. And if level 3 rules of some method of induction are successful, then level 3 rules of scientific induction are also successful, and so on for all the levels. Now, this is what Reichenbach wants. The problem is that this isn't what the pragmatist ends up establishing from their premises. And here's why. We suppose that some method of induction, call it method X of inductive logic, is successful on level 1. That means that the arguments method X judges to be inductively strong give us true conclusions from true premises most of the time. So there comes a point where we end up judging this argument. Level 1 rules of method X have been reliable in the past, therefore level 1 rules of method X will be reliable in the future as successful. Now look at premise 3 in the Reichenbach argument again. Premise 3 said that if nature is not uniform, then no method will be successful. We've assumed that there is a successful method, method X, and we're considering in particular its level 1 rules, which are also successful because we assumed the whole method is. So by premise 3, nature is uniform. Now since nature is uniform, by premise 2, scientific induction eventually discovers that uniformity and successfully judges the above argument as inductively strong. But let's have a think about what's happened here. look carefully at the argument on the screen, and once you've done that, have a go at this question. Now, a successful scientific induction argument that judges the argument on the screen as inductively strong is a level 2 scientific induction argument. The reason is that the argument on the screen concerns level 1 arguments. So any argument about that argument that judges it to be successful must be one level up, so it must be a level 2 argument. So what the pragmatist has actually established is this. If some system of inductive logic has successful rules on level 1, then scientific induction provides a justifying argument for these rules on level 2. And you can make the same argument for any level. And so in general, the pragmatist has established this thing. If some system of inductive logic has successful rules on level n, then scientific induction provides a justifying argument for these rules on the next level, on level n+1. And this isn't quite enough to rationally justify scientific inductive logic, because for that to work, we want to argue that if some system of inductive logic has successful rules on level 1, then scientific induction provides a justifying argument for these rules also on level 1. What we end up with is a justifying argument for these rules on level 2. So let's summarize what we've seen. Reichenbach tried to make the following argument. Either nature is uniform or it's not. If nature is uniform, scientific induction will be successful, and if nature is not uniform, then no method will be successful. Therefore, for any n greater than or equal to 1, if some method of induction will be successful on level n, then scientific induction will eventually be successful on that same level, on level n. But we don't have that. What the pragmatist actually established is this thing. Either nature is uniform or it's not. If nature is uniform, scientific induction will be successful, and if nature is not uniform, then no method will be successful. Therefore, for any n greater than or equal to 1, if some method of induction will be successful on level n, then scientific induction will eventually be successful on level n+1, so not level n like we actually wanted. Now, of course, the pragmatist has established this conclusion in a deductively valid way, but the point is that this conclusion doesn't overcome Hume's problem, because you need the success of level 1 scientific induction in the conclusion, not level 2 of scientific induction. So just like the inductive justification of induction, the pragmatic justification of induction fails to overcome Hume's problem. And this brings us to the end of trying to rationally justify scientific inductive logic. Remember that this was one of the problems we said we'd tackle back in lecture 5. The other problem was how we'd go about constructing a system of scientific inductive logic. And so in the next few lectures, we'll turn our attention to that second question instead. So have a go at the last question, and I'll see you all next time.